All right, I know. Some of you know that's not a photo, it's a render. But hear me out. What if I told you that took about 20 to 30 minutes to set up? In today's lesson, I thought we should try something different. Instead of doing ZBrush and sculpting, I thought I will show you how I do my rendering when I render out toys. I've used plenty of renders in the last 15 years that I've been doing CG. I've worked on Scanline for 3D Max when it started. I've done mental ray rendering with Maya. I've used Vray for at least 10 years. But for the last 4 years, I've been using Adobe Dimension for all the projects. And why? Because I think it's so good, it's so simple, and it's really clean, and the results are just amazing for the amount of time that you spend into it. And that's really important. So without further ado, let's jump into Dimension this time. Exporting the files into Adobe Dimension, you can do it two ways. You can actually export each subtool, or you can export it as a merge tool. So you can go ahead and export each one of them, or you can go and do merge visible, and that will create this. Now, let's say you receive the file from a client, and when you import it in your software, you'll have them all in one polygroup, like in ZBrush. So if you get that, make sure before you send it into Adobe Dimension to go into polygroups and just do auto groups. What it's going to do is going to make each piece that it's separate its own polygroup, and that will help us, and I'll show you why in a second. Now we're in Dimension. I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene. So we go create new. And as I told you before, you can either export each piece separate, or you can export it as a merged object. And why is that? Because if you go ahead and try to import a 3D model inside, you want to import multiple ones, you can't. If I go ahead and hold shift, I can't select multiple ones. You'll have to go in and import each one, which is not a problem if your model doesn't have too many pieces. If you have a complex file, you'll have to merge it and import it. The problem with merging it is you might run into the error of Dimension crashing while loading the file, because I've noticed that the moment that it goes over 1.5 million polygons or triangles, then you'll start having a problem with the model. But if you stay under that, you should be okay. So I'll go ahead and import the merged one, and hopefully it will work just fine. When you import the model into Dimension, sometimes you'll see it go through the floor. Sometimes it's not visible. Sometimes the sizing is really small. So to make sure the model is sitting on the floor, just make sure you have the model selected. And there is an icon here. Just move to ground, and you can just click it, and it will just set it up. If you press F, it will frame on your model. Right? Now, remember when we were in ZBrush, we actually made sure we have auto groups, so you have different groups. Well, we did that. So now if I go ahead and open this, you'll notice that each piece is separate. So now we can add different shaders, we can add different colors, and that will be really helpful when you start rendering. Now, before we start doing any rendering, what I really encourage you to do is go in and name these. Although we don't have many of them, but it's really better than trying to guess which piece we're working on. So I'm going to go ahead and just name these really quick. Now that we have all the parts named, and we're ready to start rendering this scene. Now, the most important thing about Adobe Dimension is actually thinking about what background you'll be using. So for this one, I already have the background ready. So I'm going to go ahead and import the background. So how do you do that? You go on Environment, and you click Background, where you have this square, the white square, and you click on it. You go Image, and you select. Now, you can get a lot of free background photos from a lot of websites online, but I really highly recommend checking out, Adobe Stock, Shutterstock, Getty Images, or any of those like really high quality photo sites, because you'll find some really good photos that you can actually work with, and they're really easy to edit. And most of them are actually digital files and not photos. So for this one, what I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using this one, this photo that I got from Adobe Stock. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and just hide the model for a second. Just I'm going to show you the background. So this is the background that we're going to place our model on it. And immediately you can see this is really nice to work with. So I chose this just because it has like a spooky feeling of the Red Riding Hood, and it will be a nice contrast because the toy is going to be red and white, and it's going to be a really nice contrast on top of that. So before we start doing anything, what I wanted to do is I want to set up the environment and the lights. And to do that, just select environment. And here, I want you to click Match Image and make sure you have Image Aspect Ratio. And then for the Create Lights, I want to select Multiple Lights. And go ahead and click OK. So what it's going to do is going to do two things. It's going to crop, actually three things. It's going to crop the image to the rendering area to fit the image that we're working with. Now, the second thing it's going to do is going to create our lights, which is 3-directional lights. And the last thing is going to make our photo as an HDRI or a spherical map to use as our environment. And you'll see how helpful is that in just a second. So now we go back in our scene and we unhide the model. So this is our model. In some photos, the perspective matching, the software is going to do it for you, but some photos will not give you that option. And for this one, it's a pretty straightforward and really simple to match, so you can actually do it manually. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and just find an angle that works for me. I think something like this. Middle click, you can pan. Right click, you can rotate. If you move the mouse wheel, you can zoom. All right, so something like that. Now, once you're happy with where your model is sitting, I want to make sure I don't lose the camera location. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and bookmark the camera. So I'm going to click on the camera bookmark, and I'm just going to create a new one. And you can name this, camera 1. And you can create multiple ones. And this is really important, and you'll see that in a second. All right. So now that we're ready, let's go ahead and set up the lights. Now, under environment, what I want to do is I want you to go ahead and just turn off all the lights, so we don't have any lights on. And this is a really good exercise to get into the habit of doing. When you start working with lights, don't turn everything on and start figuring out which works, what doesn't work. Try to go at it systematically. Try to, start with the environment light, which, if you think about it in photography, when you set up your model on the table, that's the light that it's in the room. It's be it a light from the ceiling, a light from another room, or a window, or whatever. So we'll start with the environment light. So I'm going to turn environment lights on, and this is what it gives us. And you can go ahead and play with the global intensity, and that will give you stronger light or less. Maybe it's too strong. So I don't think something like this would work. Now you can actually rotate this. Now on this one, you're not going to see a huge effect because the background is pretty simple. You don't have like a big, difference of contrast of light or bright or dark areas. So you'll notice even with this one, if you look at her face, if you look in this area, you'll notice that when I start rotating this, it's going to move around and it's going to, just subtle, but that subtle, it can make a difference between nicely lit or just okay. All right, so once we have that set up, I can move on to the next light. When you're working with lights on a background, which is a photo, you have to think a bit of how that photo was shot. Was it outside? Are there any particular lights, shining on this piece? And you have to make it so it blends in with the background, because you don't want that product to, you know, look as if it's placed on top. You want it to feel as if it was rendered there, because Dimension does a beautiful job of casting shadows on the photo, and at the same time when you render it out, it's going to give you a separate file to work with, a separate layer to work with. So I'm going to go to direction light, and I'm just going to start rotating this just to see what angle should I go with. And I'm thinking I'm going to have this light shine from screen left, just to make that our key light, and maybe play around with the height a bit of it, and the intensity maybe lower. And one thing that they added recently is you can actually change the size of the light, and you can think about it as a big softbox or a small light. It just makes a huge difference on how, you know, light spills on your model. So I'm gonna go maybe something like this, and I think I want the edges to be soft. Don't worry if you don't get it right from the start. What I'm trying to set up here is like our initial light setup, and then we can go ahead. So I'm not going to go ahead and turn the second light. I'm actually going to turn off the first light, and then I'm going to go to the second light. Now for the second light, I want this to be more of a screen right, and I want this to be more of a rim light. So it will give us a nice edge on the nice contour on the body. So I'm going to select the second one, and I'm going to start rotating the light just so it hits from that side. And I think I might need to make this maybe a bit lower, something like that. Maybe rotate it a bit to the back, and I'm going to make this size big, and I'm going to make the edge soft, and maybe make it just a bit bluer, not by much, because I don't want the colors to stand out too much, because then it will, if you add maybe something like this, you'll notice that it will just, you know, jump at you, and it will look like, oh, how that light, but it's not affecting anything else. So even if you make warm, or you know, you make a cold light, just make sure you make it subtle. Don't add anything that jumps out. Even if you do a warm one, maybe something like this, but don't go too crazy with the colors. You have to respect, in a way, like the background guides your lighting. So this is why selecting the background, I think it's half of the job. If you just build up a nice library of different backgrounds, it will just save you a lot of headache. And because you'll give you a lot of options of, you know, a sunny day, or a cloudy day, or maybe something with neon lights, or a street light, or whatever. So for this one, I want something to be cold, so something like this will work nice. Now for the next light, again, I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to turn that on. You'll notice that I left environment light on. If I go back to photography again, you can't turn environment light. Well, you can if you start putting blinds and shutting all your blinds and putting, like, you know, black blankets and so on. But for this one, I'm just talking if let's think of the environment is actually the room we're standing and we're trying to photograph, you know, the product. So for the last one, I want this to shine from above just a bit. So I'm going to make this high, and I'm going to rotate a bit. So I might try to have the light hitting from the back, just so it gives me a nice, you know, shadow on her face. And I would love to see those horns on the floor. It will give us. So I'm thinking something like that. So now I can go ahead and actually turn on all the lights. So this is what it would look like. And don't worry if when you render the first time, it will look a bit blown out. It will look maybe too bright or whatever. It's the same. I'll go back to photography. It's the same thing. You'll have to match, the light for your needs and for your product and for the background that you're going for. So now we're ready to do our first render. And you'll notice I haven't touched shading yet. So I'm just working with the model, with the simple one color model, because I want to make sure the lighting is good. And then once I add the shaders, I'll tweak to make the lighting perfect. So in this software, you can actually render two ways. You have this render, which actually is like a real-time render. So if you click on this, I can rotate the model and we'll start rendering it. I can actually, change the lighting setup and rotate the environment or tweak it. And you'll notice the first thing you'll notice is maybe the light from this side is a bit too strong. So I'll go back to my directional light, and you can actually, while rendering, you can actually turn off the lights and you can preview a rendering. Now keep in mind the rendering will be a bit different from what you see here, but not a lot different. Like you're not gonna have a lot of noise. The shadows will be nicer on the floor. You're not gonna see the grid lines on the floor. It will be a bit cleaner. But it's a good tool to preview your lights before starting to render. So for this one, maybe bring down the intensity just a bit. We'll wait a second for that to update. And maybe a bit lower. And then I can turn on the other one. And see how nice and soft that feels. It just frames our model really nice. And for the last light that's hitting from the top and casting a bit of a shadow, which is shadows in this rendering mode they're a bit tricky and a bit harder to see, but once we render them out, they will look way better. So now I'm happy with the lighting, so I can go ahead and actually start adding a bit of shaders. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the real-time rendering. You can leave it on; it works really fine even if you. So what I want to go now, I want to go into the materials, and I'm going to use the shaders that come installed into Adobe Dimension. I'm not going to use anything custom. I'm just going to use the shaders that comes with the software. So from the ones that I really love using is something called a fine grain. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this and drop it on the hoodie. And you'll notice how fast that starts rendering, so you can actually see that in real time. So when I planned this out, I wanted the hoodie to be red, and I wanted the blood on the knife to be red, and everything else I wanted to keep white. The style that I'm going for more of an art piece, an art toy, a more simplistic two-color design. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the rendering, and you can actually copy or color pick a shader. And by color pick a shader, it's not only the colors, it will actually color pick the entire shader. And you'll notice that in a second. So I can select the droplet, and then I'll select the color picker by clicking I, and then I can select this one, and then I'm gonna do the other droplet, I. Okay, now because the knife is made of one piece, I'll have to render it in two passes, and I'm going to show you how I work with that in a second. Rendering it in two passes means I have to render it once in red, and I have to render it once in white. So for now, I'm going to render it in red first. So now I'm going to select the coat, and I'm going to do the same thing. So now these are the pieces that I want them to be white. Again, red. Again, the blouse and her hands, I want the arms, I want those to be white as well. And I'm going to do the same thing by rendering them out as white, and rendering another scene as red, and then we can actually compose them inside Photoshop. So let's go ahead and tweak the shader. So I created one shader, and by one shader I mean if I go ahead now and choose another color, you'll notice that it's going to change on all of them. I don't have to do, because they're all linked. And you'll notice, so let's say we're going to go with maybe something bloody, something like that. If I go ahead and select this one, you'll notice that there is a chain link here, so you can actually break that link. So the moment you click on that one, now this shader has the same attributes, the same properties, but now I can, if I start editing it's not going to affect the other parts. So I'm going to go back, select this, and color pick the color, and I can, all right, so let's do our first test. So I'm going to do a render just to see how the reflection looks. And I really like how the light is hitting this. It's creating a nice, and the rim light is creating a really nice, you know, a silhouette, and it's framing the model really nice. I might go ahead and play around maybe with this one, because now we have this red color. I think it might work if it's a bit more intense, just to see. And you can actually take this, you know, when you're doing the rendering, take it as, you know, an exercise to see if the model looks good in quote unquote realistic light. If you see anything wrong with it, if maybe something sticks out that you didn't notice while sculpting it, sometimes I'll usually render the sculpt that I'm working on while working on, like, doing the first stage. I'll do a quick render in Dimension, because Dimension is really fast. It's really fast when it comes to rendering, and it doesn't take me long to try different light setups. It's a really good tool to use, especially when you're doing product design, because it saves you the headache of, you know, actually printing it, painting it, setting up lights, and testing out materials, and just gives you, it's not going to give you the 100% you know, look of the model, and it's not going to look, you know, exactly as the final model, but it will give you an idea, and it gets you there for about, you know, 80% there to test out different looks, different materials, different colorways. If you want to see how this looks painted with black and gold, you can do that, and it takes you like 5 to 10 minutes to set it up without too much hassle. And if you would do this with printing, well, the print alone takes a lot of time. Then you have to, you know, sand it, paint it, and all that, and it just saves you about 2 or 3 days. So this is why we set up a bookmark at the start, because if we start moving this around, and especially when you make 2 passes and you want to make sure they're going to align perfectly, if I have a bookmark ready, I can just go back to my camera 1, and it's just going to jump to that point. Now, before I start rendering this for actual or final render, I'll go ahead and select one of the pieces which has red. It doesn't matter which one of them. It's not like this one is the parent and the other one. You can edit any of the parts, and it's gonna edit all the shaders, because it's just one shader added to multiple parts. So I might go ahead and remove the roughness material. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete it, and I will go ahead and add a bit of reflection and do another render to see how that looks, because I think the reflection was a bit too strong for my taste. I wanted that to be a bit subtle. And we can actually go and render out different passes of only reflection or only glossiness, and you can add them at the end. So maybe play around with the roughness a bit more. I think something like this will work nice. All right, I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to go ahead and select the fine grain again and drop that on the skirt. So what I'm going to do now, I think he added it to the whole thing. Just make sure you double click on the piece so it's selected only one of them, and then I'm going to drag that on top, and then I'm going to change this into something like this. And then for the shoe, I go V, select the color, and for the face, what I want to do, I don't want this to be pure white. I want it to be like a dirty white or something closer to a bright gray. So I'm going to remove the roughness. And I think I just want this just subtle, because I want these parts to be matte and that part to be shiny, just to have a nice material contrast when in the final product. And I'm also thinking about how will I composite this in Adobe Photoshop, because then if I want to add a bit of more exposure, you think about it as if when you're taking a raw photo, you always think of, maybe it's better to shoot a photo underexposed by one stop rather than, overexposing it, and then you burn out all your whites and you can't recover any of that. So while I'm rendering, I'm thinking about, okay, so what I'm going to do to this in Photoshop. So I think that's a bit too bright. So I'm going to go ahead and just lower it just a bit. Remember, you can always make the bright gray, more white. But if you have a pure white, bringing that back to gray, it will cause a bit of noise. It will cause a bit of problems when, capturing the color. So I think just finding that perfect, I think maybe that's a bit too much. All right. So that's about it. That's how I set up my renders. This is the whole process that I go through. And once I'm happy with that, I'll just go ahead and select render. Now you'll notice here that you have all, but I'm only rendering the camera view, which you can select camera 1, and this is where you give it the name. So I want this to have rendered number 1, and for the quality. Now, for low, I would render the low if you want to test it out, because it's really fast to render this out, and you can test out the looks of it and see if that looks good. And I'm going to show you the difference between those. So I'm going to go ahead and render this as 0.1 low, and let's go ahead and hit render. So that was it. This took 22 seconds to render, and you'll notice that not only that the shadows look way better in this render, but also you can actually see a bit of light bleed. It's when the color, or color bleed, is when the color is actually affecting the background is sitting on. So you can see a bit of red on the floor, which is really nice. Like for a software that takes so easy to set up, the result is really great. Now, what I noticed is the rendering area is too small. So to fix that, we're going to go back to design and select, don't select anything. So if you have environment selected, you're not going to get to it. So just click in the area here, and here you'll have the canvas size. Just make sure you have the link. So you have proportional size, so it sizes proportionally, and you go, maybe something around 2048 should be more than enough. I'm going to go ahead and just fit canvas, render. And for the low quality, you'll notice that you have a lot of noise. You don't have a lot of detail showing. So the beauty of this is the background is not affected. The background is actually a photo, so it doesn't render the background. It just uses the background as a background, and it just renders the model and a plane. There is like a plane underneath it to capture that shadow and to capture, people who come from Vray know that you have to set up this in Vray. You have to set up something called a Vray floor, and then give it the setting to cast shadow and color, and that on its own, it's a headache to set up perfectly. So usually what I'll use low to see if everything looks well, color-wise, shader-wise, glossiness, and so on. But once I'm happy with it, I'll just render it in medium. I never use high. I think I used high like twice. It takes way too much time. And the differences for what I need, which I'll post this on Instagram, I'll post this on my website. Even if I do a 4K rendering and I want to do cropping from it, you're not going to notice. Why? Well, once we jump into Photoshop, I'm going to show you why. Because this software is just super great when it comes to rendering. For how simple it is and how fast it works, the results are really, really good. So I'm going to select medium, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to save this as med and go ahead and render. All right, so this is the render in medium settings, and you'll notice this took about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And one of the other things that I love about this software is if you click here on these 3 dots and go edit in Photoshop, it will send the file into Photoshop, and you'll have everything into different layers. So you'll have the background, which is pretty high quality. It's the same background the image that you put in. If you want, you can actually, because this is scaled down, you can actually import the stock photo, because usually they're bigger 4K or 6K photos, and it might give you a bit of more sharpness. But what I've noticed is the fact that it's scaled down a bit, it just blurs it a bit, and it just makes it fit more with the render. Now, you'll notice two layers here. You'll notice one called reduced noise and one called rendered image. Now, here's the reduced noise, and I'm just going to go in. So you'll notice how nice this looks. And this is the actual render. Now, while medium still has noise, now, if you're zoomed out, you barely can notice it. You can still notice it, but it's not that strong. But if you go to the reduced noise, it just looks clean. Looks really, really clean without being mushed up. And so it just adds a denoiser on it once it finishes rendering. So just gets rid of one extra step. Now, what I like to do is, because even in photography, you have a bit of noise, is I'll keep the rendered image and I'll, under fill or opacity, I'll just add maybe 10% or 20% of that noise. It just gives a nice texture. And also noise acts also as a sharpening filter, because it makes everything just feel a bit more sharper. So now that I have this base image, and it's just perfect, it's exactly what I'm looking for. The light looks good, the colors look good. Now the next step is to render the white version. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to render it again with the jacket, the coat, and the knife in white. So we'll jump back into Dimension. And here's why the bookmark of the camera is really, really important. So I'm going to go and select this, and I on your keyboard, the color picker, so we can select that one. And then for this one, I'm going to do the knife, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And we're going to render this one as 02, medium. So now we have the white parts. Again, took 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm just going to do the same thing, edit in Photoshop. It's going to bring that into Photoshop. And for this one, I just need the reduced noise one. You can actually grab two of them if you need, but I think the reduced noise is just what I need for this one. So I'm just going to drag it here. Just close this one, and I'm just going to place it on top. Just make sure it's... Sometimes it just shifts a bit. Okay. So now that we have both layers, we just need to create different folders for them and then start masking the parts that we don't need. Now to do that, we'll go ahead and hide the rendered image one. And I'm going to put this into, I'm going to leave this here and just going to put this into a folder. And for this one, I'm just going to add a mask. All right. And I'm just going to fill it with black. So this way it's not visible. So what I want is I want the arms and her t-shirt to be white. So to do that, I'm just going to select B, and I'm just going to select a hard round brush and smaller size. And if I start and drawing with white, it will just show the rendered image, and only the part that's going to show, it's the part that's going to be paint the mask in white. So I'm just going to go in and paint this. If you want, you can go ahead and turn on smoothing, and that's going to help. If you use ZBrush, you're going to be used to this because it's similar to Lazy Mouse. And usually I like to do the outlines first, just to make sure I have these. Now, if you want, you can create a line and connect these. And if you make sure they're connected, just saves you a bit of time. Go G, paint bucket, and just fill that. And then I go ahead. Now you can go ahead and fill that again. The only problem with that is the edges start to sharpen a bit too much, and I don't like that. So I want them to be soft. So I'd rather go in and just paint these manually, because it's honestly, it's not a lot. All right. So I'm just going to go and do that. And I'm going to do the same thing for the knife. And I'm just going to go fast forward this one, because it's basically I'm doing the same thing. And now that I have the rendering done and both of the colors done, I can go ahead and just work with this as if I would work on a photo. Now, you'll notice when you start filling the areas, you'll find some places where the color went off. This is why I created the mask, because if you would have started deleting on the actual layer, you would have destroyed that. And I really, really love working non-destructive, because it gives you the option of, you know, coming back and tweaking. So I just have to go over the mask and like zoom really close, and then make sure you have a black color selected. Just fix that. You'll notice it here. Now it's a bit too harsh. You can go down and just tweak the hardness just a bit. Sometimes it's good to rotate, so I'll press R on my keyboard, and just easier to handle when you're working on a tablet. So just reset view, and that is our model. So now I have an idea if this colorway works for me or not. So let's go ahead and work on this. As now, one thing I forgot to mention, in these ones, you'll have something called additional layers. Now with this, what it's going to do is going to create like a different mask selections for all the parts. So you're going to see the knife is on a separate part, and that will be helpful if you want to select a certain part and just start painting it. For me, it wouldn't have helped because I know the coat and the t-shirt is the same part, and the other one is the knife with the blood has the same part as well. So now that we have our render ready, I can go ahead and add all of these into one folder. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it, Control J, and then I'm going to merge it. And before I start adding any edits, I'm going to right click and create a smart object. Again, I'm trying to keep everything non-destructive just because it's easier to edit and it's easier to tweak. And then under filter, I'm going to go camera raw filter, and I'm just going to work on this as if I would work on a photo. So I would start with maybe lowering the temperature, and then trying to see maybe a bit of green would work. Maybe expose this just a bit, and then crank up the contrast. Maybe remove a bit of the highlights. And then I want to give it more texture, a bit of clarity, maybe a bit of dehaze, and a bit of vibrance. And you can do all the other tweaks that you would do to a photo as well. Maybe add a bit of vignette, and we can add vignette by going to optics. You can add a bit of vignette, or you can add a bit of maybe distortion just to mimic a lens. Or, so you can either add vignette like this, but there is another way which can control how intense it can be. So you can add vignette like this, hit OK. And if you look at this now, you'll see how nice that feels. So if I want to remove the vignette, just because we created a smart object, I can actually double click on this and remove the vignette. And I'm going to show you the other way to create a vignette. Create a new layer, and then go Alt Backspace to fill it. Just make sure you have white selected. So Alt Backspace. And then here under Filter, go Lens Correction. Underneath Custom, just go Vignette and Amount. And usually I'll just put maximum. I'll show you why in a second. Just go OK. And now with this layer selected, I can go ahead and do multiply or color burn or linear burn or darker color. So I have way more options to work with. So I'll do multiply, and I can tweak the intensity as much as I like. Okay. Now, one other thing I really like to do to the photos. Now you can call this done. This is a good rendering. It looks good. It has the nice colors. It has a nice mood. But just to finish this off, I'll go into adjustments, and underneath I want to select color mockup, and I'm going to go ahead and add a LUT to this. You can use your LUTs library, or usually I'll just use the stuff that's included with Photoshop. And you can, and this is just a matter of preference. It's not, there is no wrong or right. It's just what mood are you going through. Now I love film stock because it adds a bunch of highlights or contrast to it. And then if I wanna make this, give this maybe like a softer look, I can go ahead and maybe add soft warming. And again, you don't have to leave it at 100%. You can always get opacity and lower it down to fit the look that you are going with. So maybe something around here. Or if you don't like that one, or maybe you want to go for a more hotter look, you can do like futuristic bleak, and that can give you a different look. Now, before I wrap this video up, I want to show you a couple of photos that I took of the model once it was finished. And this is a photo, and it just goes to show that the quality that you get from something that takes you about 20 to 30 minutes to set up and just render it and just trying new stuff, it's really good to visualize the product before you go into production. Now, this is the same photo of this is the same model in an outside setup, just to see, because I wanted to have that Red Riding Hood in the forest kind of look. I think Adobe Dimension is a really underrated tool, and I think it has to be used more and more by product designers, especially people who do 3D and do a product design, because it's really fast, it's really easy to use, it gives you a lot of options, and the result, how fast the result is, it's really, really good. I know you can get way better results in Vray and way better results in Arnold or whatever, but the time you set up shadings and lighting and all that, it's not worth the time that you put just if you want to try stuff. And the other thing is, like, I can go in now and I can tweak the colors, and I can do another render because I already have the light set up. So if I want to try a black with a gold, if I want to do a black with the red, I can do that. I can just switch it. Well, here's the thing. If you have only one model and you're taking a photo of it, you're not going to be able to do that. You might be able to do that with photo editing, but it's not the same. It's still going to take you a lot, and you still have to be really good at it to tweak the colors without affecting the model. So I really hope you found this helpful, and if you have any questions, leave a comment below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. All right, see you in the next one.
Assim,